I am a great-grandson of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa and his wife, Mary Jane O'Donovan Rossa.
Can you talk us through like your family tree and how like you get back to, not that you're going back that far, but how you get back to Rasa?
Yeah, I mean, how I get back to Rossa is that, so basically, he was exiled to New York in 1871. His wife, Mary Jane, had been here earlier in that decade, raising money for the cause, for the political prisoners, including O'Donovan Rossa. And so when there was some reforms done by Gladstone, I think, in terms of the treatment of Irish prisoners, he was given the option, I think, of going to Australia or New York. I think those are the two places he was going to go. And so he chose New York because Mary Jane had already had some time here. So he came to New York, and eventually he lived in Brooklyn, parts of Manhattan, and then he eventually settled in Staten Island, and they had a number of children together. His youngest daughter, who we call Daisy, is my grandmother. So she was born here, I believe in Staten Island, and so so she had two sons. One was my father, and my father was born in Staten Island, and then I was born from my father. So in 1968.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, so it's interesting because I should be a great grandson on some level, but because my father had me when he was somewhat old, and his mother was the youngest daughter of Jeremiah Donovan Ross and Mary Jane, it almost like skips a generation.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm like, it's strange because I like look at my father's life, and he kind of comes from, he fought World War II, and he was a bit older, and then his mother was the youngest daughter of Mary Jane and O'Donovan Rossa. So
Okay,
yeah,
right.
it's a strange sort of like
It is. Yeah. It's strange that it's
acceleration.
your great grandfather and not your
Yeah,
great great.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
Feels very close, relatively speaking.
So Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa was from Rosscarbery in Cork. Mary Jane Irwin, where was she from?
Mary Jane Irwin from Clonakilty.
From Clonakilty.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, but it was over here where they married over here in the US.
Well, they tried to get married in West Cork, I think, but there's a whole story that even though they're pretty pious, they're religious, but the church they wouldn't marry them in a lot of parishes because he was a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and they knew that. And so I think there's some story where one parish made some sort of deal, and they actually did get married there, but they were rejected from being married by a lot of churches up and
Right.
down. I think in West Cork mostly at that time. I mean, this is like the 1860s, so
Okay.
so he was a known quantity at that point. It was like the troublemaker O'Donovan Rossa. We can't let him get married, man.
And
But yeah.
did your dad speak of Rossa much?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, we definitely knew that we were related to a Irish hero of some sort. I mean, it was somewhat vague. We knew about the famous speech that Patrick Pearse gave over his grave, as many secondary school students in Ireland learn about. So beside that, though, we didn't really know that much. I mean, I went to Ireland with my brother, with my dad, a few times when we were young, like in teenagers, early 20s, as kids. There was one summer I think we spent in maybe Waterford when we were like little ones. But, and he had a great love of Ireland. I mean, he was just very enchanted by Irish writing, Irish, the wit. I mean, he had a lot of Irish literary friends, including Seamus Heaney and Brendan Kennelly and a bunch of other people that he valued as great friends. So it was never really like the political thing. I mean, that time it was kind of during the Troubles, and we did go to Northern Ireland when I remember going to Belfast when I was a teenager and crossing the militarized border. I mean, I remember that and being in Belfast and seeing these teams of British army soldiers like doing maneuvers right around you while everyone's just shopping, and suddenly there'd be like this tactical team of RUC types or British Army. But yeah, I mean, he had a great love of Ireland, and he was always proud to say, I'm the grandson of O'Donovan Rossa. And I mean, he fought in World War II, and even right after he left, right after VE Day in Paris, he forged a document saying that a sergeant gave him permission to go to Ireland. So like in 1945, 46, sorry, I can't remember exactly the date, but he was the first U.S. GI to enter Ireland.
No way.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And then he said, "I'm O'Donovan Ross's grandson," and they were like, "Oh." And then they introduced him to De Valera. Like he went there and he met De Valera, and they stood back to back, to see who was taller, type thing. And this is like, it's amazing that he did that, because he really was like, he wanted to go to Ireland, I guess, so bad that he wrote a story about it called "Goofing Off" that I published in the Brooklyn Rail, which is a publication I have. I can give you the link or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, it's a great story. He's just like, forged it. Like, yes, I give Private Cole or Sergeant Cole permission to go to Ireland, and he just took off and went there and had like an adventure there in 1940. 1945 was VE Day, I think. 1946. God, I should remember that. Anyway.
And the first time you went to Ireland was when you were a teenager?
I think the first time was when I was probably like 6 or 7.
Okay.
Like, spent a summer there as a little guy. But I mean, my dad actually wanted to move to Ireland when we were little. Like I have a list of the pros and cons that he wrote out of moving to Ireland in the 70s. But my mother, they were both literary, both living in the city, and she just felt it was going to be too like constrictive, I think. And she didn't really want to live there on some level because, Ireland in the 70s definitely had its
own issues.
It's had its own issues, I mean, the
Yeah.
Catholic Church running everything, kind of like, very, kind of a somewhat oppressive atmosphere, So, but, he was serious about trying to move there sometime in the 70s, I think. But so then we went a few times when we were, I think, teenagers, and then in our early 20s. And we would go to West Cork. We would go see, the O'Donovan Rock in St. Stephen's Green. Go to Skibbereen. Yeah, but at that point it was more like, oh, Donovan Ross's grandson. We'd visit a lot of writers and stuff, and here's a pint or whatever. So we, up until later in life, I never really knew a lot about the details and the history of what O'Donovan Rossa stood for, or what he did, or even what Mary Jane did, and what and stood for. So it was always like somewhat superficial, I'd say. Our understanding, it was like, oh, he's an Irish hero, and when we would meet an Irish person, we would throw out the name to see if they recognized it. Maybe it was 50-50. Sometimes, oh yeah, the speech over Padre. Yeah, I remember that, learning about that. And then some would be like, oh, Donovan Rossa, So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like in Ireland we learn, obviously in school we learn history, and part of that is Irish history. Doesn't delve into Irish American history very much. So a lot of the people, let's say like John Devoy, for example, who he came over here with, we wouldn't learn anything about John Devoy in school. But we do learn about O'Donovan Rossa because his funeral was in Ireland,
Yes.
Patrick Pearse gave that famous oration at his funeral. So therefore, in school, we would hear of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa, but we won't hear about Devoy.
But you probably didn't learn about the Brooklyn Dynamite School or the Dynamite campaigns either.
No.
That Devoy and O'Donovan Rossa were involved in, Clan na Gael and etc.
Yeah, and that was in Brooklyn, right?
It's in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Dynamite School, just right up here in Greenpoint, from what I understand,
Right, yeah, okay. Did your father keep the Rossa name? Did he have Rossa in his name?
Yeah, I mean, he was born, it's interesting, because he was born William Harrison Cole. His brother was named Rossa Cole.
Okay.
But I think he was always jealous of that, because he was the one that kind of like gravitated more toward Irish culture, writing, history, and so he ended up changing his middle name to Rossa.
No
So
way.
he was William Rossa Cole, yeah. And then he named me Williams with an S, Rossa Cole.
Right. Okay.
And my brother's name is Rossa Williams Cole. So we have like
Really?
so we have opposite thing.
Do you know where that Rasa came from?
Yeah, it's somewhat disputed, but I think in Shane Kenna's book, he kind of comes to the conclusion that it was just a way of differentiating the O'Donovans from the other O'Donovans in the area. So it was like, because it was near Roscommon and Roscarbery and all these places, so it became the O'Donovans of Ross, of Ross. So it became O'Donovan Rossa, I think.
Also comes from Roscarbery.
I think so, yeah.
Nice.
Or that area, where there's a lot of Rossas and stuff like that. I mean, there was a somewhat apocryphal story of that. Because he had a red beard at one point that they called him O'Donovan Rossa, like because Ross is red in Italian, but I don't know if that holds water.
Yeah. Okay.
But like I said, I didn't know anything really about him. So I think it was 2014. This woman, Judy Campbell, who's in Rebel Wife and Rebel Rossa, she's a late career historian, but very interested in Rossa and his wife, Mary Jane, left a message for me when we had answering machines, 2014. And I remember sitting in this very kitchen right here and listening to her being, my name's Judy Campbell. I grew up on Staten Island. I just wanted you to know, I'm interested in O'Donovan Rossa, and that next year they're starting to do commemorations. It's 2015. The 100-year anniversary of O'Donovan Rossa's funeral, and I was sitting here thinking, wow, this got to be the time I do a film on O'Donovan Rossa, because I've been thinking about it. I have like a little file that is very weak, about him, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it. But because they were doing these commemorations, which included a lot of reenactments and things like that, I said, this is the time that I have to figure out how to do this film. And then, meanwhile, I think my brother sent something like, hey, bro, do you know that they called him O'Dynamite Rossa? And I was like, what are you talking about, O'Dynamite Rossa? Yeah, it's like the Dynamite campaign, and this is something we had never heard in our family. Never. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is getting really interesting. And then, I met Shane Kenna, who is a great historian and wrote a biography of O'Donovan Rossa. And, he explained, during the 1880s, largely, that there was the skirmishing fund in New York where, people were sending money from all over the states to basically create a dynamite fund or just, agitate for Irish liberation, but more with like a force perspective. And then that turned into the Brooklyn Dynamite School, and then the Dynamite Campaign, and like I said before, like they were infiltrated by British espionage, their assassination attempts. I mean, he was very tumultuous in the New York scene. I mean, caricatures of him looking like apes, establishment totally after him. He was always defending his reputation. There were like duels. I mean, like just mayhem all the time. I think he's lived a very, very crazy life here, but he was a very public figure. So, I mean, I would got access to some newspaper databases from the 19th century, and I put in O'Donovan Rossa, and it was like thousands of articles mentioned, which I never understood, like how much of a public figure he was.
Yeah.
And basically, he was very willing to be a controversial face of like the more militant approach to Irish liberation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because he was a revolutionary, but he wasn't hiding. You know what I mean?
No, he wasn't hiding at all. I mean, I think that became his role, was that he was like this public face of that, and he was willing to take that on, and I think he did suffer from a certain amount of what we call now post-traumatic stress, because he was in English jails for 6 years. Yeah, 6 years.
And he didn't exactly have the most pleasant time there either.
No, because he was also very recalcitrant in jails. I mean, he wouldn't abide by any of the rules that they wanted to put on him as being a criminal, right? So kind of like trajectory to Bobby Sands and all those guys. It was like he wanted to be a political prisoner, and so he would not, abide by anything that they've tried to impose on him. So, as a result, they started taking away clothes. They would manacle him. He threw his waste bucket into the face of one of the governors of the jails. He was always speaking out. I mean, even at his trial, he was like, he made a mockery of the British justice system. He found like a loophole that said he could submit anything he wanted, and so he ended up reading for like a full day articles from the United Irishmen, or not the United Irishmen, but the Irish people, which he was running at that point. And the judge just got like exasperated, and I think he knew how the British justice system worked, and he found a loophole, and he used that to kind of like, really criticize it and show how hypocritical it was. And I think he got charged much more harshly because he did that, so he got life in jail at that point.
Yeah. And he got, manacled, put on a bread and water diet.
Yeah, he got manacled for 30 days, put on a bread and water diet, forced to eat off the floor pretty much. And a lot of other stuff. I mean, there were a lot of other people in that situation that were going under the same things. But I think because of his recalcitrance, he really, he got the brunt of a lot of the disciplinary stuff that the British put on him, And it's all documented. I mean, I went to the British archives, British Library in London, and I didn't know what they would have. I just put O'Donovan Rossa in, looked in the database, went to the little portal, and there was like a massive pile of original documents. I mean, most of them were like just reports from jail about the things he did and how, the punishments he got and everything. Yeah. All the original stuff. I was like, whoa. Who wouldn't stop singing Fenian songs here. He broke his wooden spoon. He wouldn't change. He did this and did that. And then, it just one thing piled on after another. And he just, they tried to break him. But at that point, the prisoners, I think the dynamic was like the precursor of Amnesty International too, the Amnesty movement. Mm-hmm. They got information out, and Mary Jane helped this about the treatment of him and other prisoners, and then that led to a more liberal prime minister like Gladstone coming in and saying, we have to reform the prison system, and these people are allowed to leave the country, exile them. Yeah. So it was a strategic move. It's like information, propaganda. It's good.
It's always interesting to me that, in my opinion, the two most famous Fenians ever would probably be Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa and John Devoy. And interestingly, not only were they both sent or exiled to New York, they both came together.
They did. Yeah.
And they had their differences as well. Really, because I can think John Devoy wasn't so much into the dynamite campaign side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at times, it's interesting. They had a very tumultuous relationship, but, they were very close. They came over together. They had a number of falling outs, some of them quite large. But Mary Jane, O'Donovan Ross's wife, was always in touch with John Devoy, which I find really interesting. Even when O'Donovan Rossa and him were very acrimonious, Mary Jane was communicating with Devoy. And actually late in O'Donovan Rossa's life, it took him a long time to pass away, but, connected to the PTSD maybe, he was kind of going in and out of, he's speaking Irish, just for years, kind of incapacitated. But Mary Jane brokered John Devoy to come out to Staten Island. So before he died, they met and kind of reconciled, which is kind of touching. They had that same struggle, but it was totally different ways. And I mean, I could see that John Devoy probably, they had the problem, but O'Donovan Rossa kind of played a role in the whole thing. In every kind of movement, revolution, liberation movement, you need somebody that will kind of be the face of the more militant threat, right? And, there was a lot of splits in different Clan na Gael, Irish Republican Brotherhood. There was a lot of, infighting and stuff. But, he played his role, and he played it well. And I think he believed it, too. I mean, you know.
Yeah, they both absolutely played their role, both of them.
Yeah.
Two different roles, but yeah.
Yeah. John Devoy was talking to Mary Jane a lot, especially about like before the Easter Rising, and you know, I mean, John Devoy really became that sort of American Irish or Irish American foothold. You know, that would kind of go around the States and get resources back to Ireland.
Yeah. Incredible.
It was important.
Yeah.
For sure.
So Jeremiah passes away in 1915. His body is ordered essentially to be sent back to Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, and Mary Jane had a pretty good role in that as well. You know, seeing the publicity, the optics of that moment where they could actually like make a big statement, and he was kind of like the perfect person to kind of take that role on because he had been away but known in Ireland, known as this fierce, independent sort of fighter, and yeah, so you know, there was a moment, August 1st, 1915, where all the different parts of the movement in Ireland too that had their own splits kind of came together. An amazing event. I mean, huge. I mean, unbelievably huge. And you know, 10,000 more, 15,000 people. I mean, going up to Glasnevin. You know, starting at the city hall. Where he laid in state, you know, the volunteers were there, you know, doing formations. So it was like it was also a time when, you know, they could show the military might. Like they knew the British were watching, but the volunteers came out with guns, different factions came out, you know, marched through the streets. So, you know, I guess the British could have come down and tried to crush it, but they knew that was not going to be a good strategy. So it was a show of arms in a way and a show of unity that really, I think, started that trajectory to the rising, you know, and then eventually to the Republic. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because like even in Ireland, like growing up, Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa would always be a household name. As in, like if somebody said that name, you'd be like, yeah, I heard of him. Now, how much you would know about him is another story.
Yeah.
But I feel like everyone would know his name.
Yeah.
Least, right? And I think the reason a lot of people wouldn't know his story is because, as I mentioned earlier, he spent a lot of his life in America, or at least a lot of the Fenian years in America.
Sure.
Right, and it's kind of the same with everyone. As soon as they leave Ireland, you don't really hear it in the Irish history books in school, you know. But yeah.
But he came back. That's the thing. Yeah.
But that groundbreaking moment, which unfortunately was his death in 1915. That's what. Like that's what made him such a huge name. He would have been a huge name anyways, but that's what makes, I guess, everyone know about him because it's right before 1916. One of the most famous Fenians in the world dies.
Yeah.
Patrick Pearse gives a speech at his funeral. Easter Rising 8 months later. You know.
I mean, it definitely makes sense for as the public relations side of things. You know, the propaganda side of things, and I do think Mary Jane was really pivotal in that. I mean, Tom Clark, Devoy, but you know, Mary Jane was on top of that. Like she saw that sort of opportunity as well. You know, bought the plot. Said, you know, we have to get over there and make this as big of an event as possible. You know, I think in Rebel Wife, I have a couple things. Like it was on the front of the Daily Mirror. You know, like huge crowds show up for O'Donovan Rossa funeral. So, you know, there's like some news film of it from you know, Pathé. So it was like it was a big kind of international event. You know.
Yeah. And so after all that, you've made 2 documentaries now. One, Rebel Rossa, about Jeremiah himself, and one, Rebel Wife, about Mary Jane Irwin.
Yeah. So Rebel Rossa came out in 2016. It was at the Galway Fleadh, and then a version of it was on RTE, and now it's still currently available on Amazon Prime and maybe some free sites. I mean, that's relatively free, but you might have to watch ads. And Rebel Rossa is really the story of myself and my brother kind of going through Ireland during that year of commemorations, 2015. And it ended up really being about like how someone like O'Donovan Rossa is used in different ways politically in modern Ireland too. So, you know, there's like, the part of it is sort of like how the difference between the North and the South. Like in the North, he was really remembered in a very different way. So I interview a lot of former hunger strikers, go deep into the Falls Road, commemorations, where he's kind of revered, in a much different way than in the South, where his name is known, but it's largely because of that speech. In the North, like he's known in more like families, Republican families, as sort of a trajectory that went on, that connected to the hunger strikers and the struggle at that point, which I found really, I didn't know that. Yeah, it was interesting. And then in the South, one thing I found really interesting that's represented in the film as well is that Sinn Féin in the South put a lot of effort into kind of creating a recreation of the funeral on August 1st, 2015, and it was quite an accomplishment. I mean, they really went full out on it. But I think in reaction to it, I don't know if that's true or not, but in reaction to knowing that they were going to do that, the Irish state at that point, decided that they were going to do the first event of the whole commemoration years was the state doing in honor of O'Donovan Ross's funeral. And so, they all came full on, military, gun salute.
Amazing.
But then but Shane Kenna was there too. And a historian for Glasnevin, I can't remember exactly who, but gave a speech that said that at the end of his life, he actually admitted that he wasn't as militant and that he believed in home rule. And Shane Kenna got so mad because it was basically somewhat revisionist. It was not really true. But I think the state at that point was just kind of nervous, right? I mean, you're going to do the biggest one televised live in Ireland about O'Donovan Rossa, and O'Donovan Rossa, Sinn Féin wanted O'Donovan Rossa because, he represented this pure republicanism.
Yeah.
So the state was a bit nervous about the whole thing and tried to soften it. So that, I play with that in the film. I really show how these different elements in politics these days kind of use an historical figure in different ways and the conflicts around that, which I found interesting, and also it tells the story of O'Donovan Rossa, of course, in a way.
Yeah.
And then Rebel Wife, which took a lot longer to make, really tells the story of Mary Jane's trajectory and what she did in the United States when O'Donovan Rossa was in prison. I mean, she went all around the States reading poetry, raising money for the political prisoners. She was quite a celebrity in her own right. And then when O'Donovan Rossa came back to New York, she kind of took a back seat, but really helmed this longer term strategy that ended up with, the funeral in Glasnevin, which I think she had a big hand in. And she was really interesting in her own right. I mean, quite a nationalist. And, the larger theme in that is that women really don't get the same credit. I mean, O'Donovan Rossa now has all these monuments. He went back to, he's buried there in the Republican plot, whereas she is really, there's nothing around her. Though they're now, I think, hoping that there's a real trajectory to get a bust of her made to put in Clonakilty as a start. Yeah. So those are the two. There's probably not going to be another one.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But O'Donovan Rossa, I think.
Both, and they're both amazing.
Okay,
both
good.
Brilliant.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
And Rebel Rossa is available on Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime. I mean, it might be on Freevee still. I'm sure somebody put it on YouTube, but try to watch it on Amazon Prime if you can, because I'll get 2 cents or something.
And Rebel Wife then?
Yeah, Rebel Wife. I mean, I've been doing screenings here and there. It's on RTE. So it's actually I think it's on the RTE player. They had a 3-year contract, so they probably have 2 more years of that. So you can watch it on RTE definitely this summer. But I'm also I'm trying to get it on another streaming service eventually, and I think at my website, rossafilm.com, I'll have it available to download through another site, to buy and download, or view.
Tyranny is the same the world over. and freedom is the saying the word!
But I hold it a Christian thing, as O'Donovan Rossa held it, to hate evil, to hate oppression.
He has talked about O'Donovan Rossa being an inspiration.
More than anyone, O'Donovan Rossa epitomized the spirit of resistance, the spirit of struggle, the spirit of we will never lie down.
Give me a tale, I'll take the horns and hooves as well. Did I outdo Cullen? Can you make it hot as hell?
I am an Irishman since I was born!
He had witnessed hunger, starvation, his own family were evicted.
Whatever the regime could throw at him, he would take and give it back with interest.
Rossa would use the term terrorism himself, and what he argued was that he was the inventor of terrorism.
He said that he was called O'Dynamite Rossa.
Now, his dynamiting campaign was based in Brooklyn.
This badger was an Irishman, had diggings in New York. Everything went down the hall, came out in County Cork.
He may not have been the wholly unrepentant Fenian.
What I've seen today is a hijacking of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa.
At the close of day, we've passed them by with not much more than a nod of the head. The fools, you cry. The fools!
1916 wouldn't have happened if all of he and some of his other Fenian friends hadn't kept it all alive.